All right, welcome to Color Out Here, Why Inclusion Means Safety for People of Color in the Outdoors. My name is Mariano Avila. I am a producer with WGVU, and we're very, very proud to be hosting today's event. And this is in partnership with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Michigan's Office of the Outdoor Recreation Industry, and Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist's office as well. So we're very proud to have everybody here. My role today is to introduce and welcome folks, but I'll primarily be focusing on Alice Lynn. She and I met probably 3 years ago at the National Equity Project, and she was working for a corporation and trying to convince them that sustainability was more than rain barrels and recycling, that it also meant race and inclusion. Later, she worked for a racial inclusion organization and talked about environmental justice as equity work. And that has been a lot of her trajectory in her work, is making sure that all of these things play into one another so that when we talk about inclusion or the environment, they really are all encompassing in that way. And then we recruited her to WGVU's Shaping Narratives program, which trained leaders of color from around the community to become media professionals enough to produce their own shows and develop them, to the point where we could have a pilot program that they designed. And we are going to show you a little clip. I'll let Alice introduce that. But in those 3 years that we've been working with Alice, she really has honed in a lot of these ideas into a program that is designed to showcase people of color engaging in the outdoors, to encourage people of colors to go outside, because as you'll learn, that's not a narrative that is out there. But more importantly, and speaking of narratives, she wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the narratives of people of color in outdoor spaces and outdoor geography. And there are a lot of other things that I could say about Alice. She is an incredible person, incredible host, and she has put together today's panel. And we are, as a station, WGVU, very proud to have everybody on. So with that, Alice, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Mariano. Yeah, so my name is Alice Jasper. Just thanks to everybody for joining us today. We wanted to talk a little bit about just inclusion in the outdoors. Not too long ago, surrounding the COVID pandemic, a coalition of about 650 businesses and nonprofits came together from around the country to create the Recreate Responsibly guidelines, which are 7 different guidelines that help to inform how we can still get outside and take care of our parks and outdoor spaces, while taking care of our health, of our family's health, our community health. And then a little bit after the initial 6 guidelines came out, the 7th was introduced, which highlights the intersection of safety and inclusion in the outdoors, which is what we really want to talk about today. So I'm just so excited and grateful to Brad Garmon and Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist for joining us in this conversation. Before we kind of jump over to them, I'm going to show you a brief clip from my show Color Out Here that highlights a couple of the experiences of exclusion that people of color have experienced when they were outside. So yeah, if you want to roll that clip, that'd be great. river, it doesn't take long for conversations to start flowing.
Yeah, we used to canoe a lot when I went to school at Haskell, all native college in Kansas. A whole group of us would go and we'd just canoe all weekend. And, we loved it. But a couple of years back, there was a white guy that was working for my tribe's natural resource department. He said, I have to go count turtles this weekend on the Manistee River. Do you want to go with me? I was like, yeah, I love canoeing. There was a group of white people in some canoes, and they were all just drunk out of their brains. And they started yelling over, oh, look, it's Pocahontas and what's his face. And I was so pissed off, like, that they just, start right in with some, racial slurs and all of that I never came on this river again since then until now.
These racial terms matter. For example, the term Redskins comes from when the U.S. government issued payment from $3 to $5 to those who murdered Native American men, women, and children. Even within my lifetime, several Michigan communities have stories of their people being killed over fishing rights.
It's peaceful. All right. I have a brother and two sisters and one nephew, and he's 13 now. I just turned 13. He sits in the house all day. He plays video games and hangs out, watches TV. But I figured we live in Michigan. Like, there's lots of stuff you should do outside. I feel an obligation to give that to him too, because nobody in my family does anything outdoors.
David's experience isn't unique. According to the Outdoor Foundation, African Americans are the least likely ethnic group to participate in outdoor recreation. 25% say it costs too much, but even taking finances out of it, 37% of African Americans say they're just not interested. And it's their lack of interest that I wonder about.
I can give some people I know a $100 bill, buy them dinner, bribe them, and they still wouldn't come out here for an hour. They still wouldn't come do it.
Legitimately too, because for every story of peace and calm, you have another story of somebody being harassed,
yeah,
or somebody not feeling comfortable, or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, if this was an everyday thing, or if this is how quote unquote outdoors was, this would be cool.
And I guess that's the point of getting out here, to make everyone feel comfortable leaving the city, so they can experience this. But we're starting to lose daylight, and we're going to need to grab some food. Great. Thanks so much. So that's just a brief clip to, I think, kind of overview what a lot of people of color feel when we're faced with going outside. So with that, I'm so excited to be joined by Brad Garmon from the director of the Michigan Office of Outdoor Industry, and Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me and inviting me. I'm really honored to be here.
Absolutely.
Me too. Thanks for having us.
So maybe if we could just start with having each of you kind of introduce yourselves, just a little bit about, all of the great things that you do. And if you could maybe speak to, I guess, what, do you go outside, and what does inclusion, what would a more inclusive outdoors look like for you and your families and your community? And I'll also add really quick for viewers, if you have any questions that you would like to submit for the Q&A portion, feel free to just put those into the chat either in YouTube or Facebook Live, and we'll hopefully we can get to as many as we're able. But yeah, so with that, Lieutenant Governor, if you could maybe start first and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Alice. And again, thank you. It's great to be here with you, to be here with Brad. I want to thank WGVU and the Kellogg Foundation for helping to make this possible. My name is Garlin Gilchrist. I'm the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan, serving alongside Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And This is a really, really important topic. So for those who may not know, I'm from Detroit. I was born in the city. I spent the second half of my childhood in the suburbs of Detroit. I live in the city now with my family. My wife and I have 3 children, twin 6-year-olds and a baby. And my childhood was very similar to the gentleman who talked about his experience in the video, in terms of, as a Black person here in the city and in the suburbs, I didn't have a lot of exposure to the outdoors and outdoor recreation beyond your basic bike riding in the neighborhood or playing sports. Fishing. Never had been fishing, or never had really been in a boat on the water. Didn't learn to swim as a child. Like, sort of these things were pretty typical. And I think about this a lot as a parent. The fact that Michigan is this amazing, just like paradise of outdoor opportunities. The 21% of fresh surface water in the world, 12,000 miles of trails. We have more lakes than any other state. There's so much opportunity for exposure and understanding and experience for young people. And so my wife and I really try to take advantage of that and expose our kids to things that I never saw as a child. Being able to see the lakes and see the sand dunes and go camping, even as much as their dad hadn't been camping before, but they like telling me about that. I think it's really important, and it's such an asset. And one of the reasons why it was so important to, I think, create this Office of Outdoor Recreation Industry, which Brad is the chair of, and I know he'll speak to a little bit more, is because we want to show that it is an important priority for the future of the state to invest in making these opportunities available and as inclusive as possible, because no one wants to enter into a space that doesn't feel welcoming, or that has not been welcoming historically, especially if there are sort of other stigmas attached to it, like just a general fear of outdoor recreation. So you don't want to sort of combine those things. And so the state of Michigan is really making an investment in how we can improve that experience and make it more available for people. And so I am, proud of the progress that is being made. I'm proud of the partnership around being able to recreate safely and recreate responsibly. And I also, just the last piece, to not totally monopolize the introduction, is that as we're thinking about how our state is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, when we issued our first stay home and stay safe orders, one of the important differences from the order that we introduced in Michigan, as opposed to those that were introduced in other states, is that we made it very clear that going outside was okay. And that, participating in outdoor recreation or outdoor exercise or outdoor activity, that was okay. And in fact, that was encouraged, because that is an important part of being healthy, regardless of what's happening in the world. And so I think it just speaks to how critical this is to, we think, what we want the experience of Michiganders to be, regardless of where they live in our state.
Thank you so much. And yeah, Brad, if you could introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit more about your office and your role, because it's still pretty new, and this is kind of the first showcase of all the great work that you're doing. So tell us about it.
Thanks, Alice. And thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for the opportunity to do this job. Honestly, when you alluded to the creation of this office being a new thing with this administration, and I'm really, really proud and excited to be here, because I think a lot of what I hope to do, and the sort of charge of this office, is to support the economic growth of this particular industry. And I think one of the critical pieces of that, if not the most critical piece, is diversity and inclusion. That the industry itself is reckoning with a history of racism and a history of being very sort of myopic in the way it looked at outdoors, and looks at it as a very white space. It really does. And I think we have to own that. I think as an industry, they're reckoning with that right now. And I think COVID and the George Floyd murder has really brought together this notion that it has to be reckoned with together, that more people going outside and getting people outside more has to confront the fact that it's not as safe and as welcoming for everyone. It needs to be, but it's not today. And I think we've seen examples of that as we've wrestled with everything else that we're doing right now. So the Michigan Office of Outdoor Industry, Governor Whitmer created this, back in September of last year. And it was following the lead of some other states where it really is recognizing this is a massive industry. The play of going outdoors is supported by a bunch of jobs and a bunch of equipment and a bunch of design and engineering and materials that Michigan should be able to do really well. That's what we do. We make things here. We innovate things here. So why aren't we focusing on this as an industry that could add some economic prosperity to people as we grow it and we celebrate all those things the Lieutenant Governor mentioned about what a paradise this really is. So that was my job, is to sort of bring those worlds together. The fact it's a great place to play with the fact that we can add jobs and add opportunity for people. So I baked into my vision for this office as I've started it these first few months and sort of got my feet under me with the idea of, two things are critical to the industry: becoming more sustainable and connecting enjoyment of places with preservation of those places, both in sort of a caretaking of trails and waterways is part of it, and being more responsible with the materials, recycling and reusing. That's where the industry is. And then the other big piece that I really want to bake into this is this that we're talking about today, that it's not just making sure that people are safe in reality if they go outside, whether it's to go up north and go skiing at one of our great ski resorts, or to the UP to try out fat biking and mountain biking in those places. It should be a place all of us can enjoy and be safe and feel safe. And that's going to take a lot of work. And I want to, start that conversation, but then also make sure that people know that diversifying also means representation within those companies and within those industries. We're putting people of color in positions to look at this industry with a new set of eyes, with a new set of priorities around how to make it as an industry more welcoming. And that's what I'm hoping to bake into Michigan's approach to this. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, for viewers who may not know, the history of environmentalism in the U.S. Has sort of always had basically white supremacy baked into it. It was, kind of curated, and conservation within was the movement of that was curated around, centering preservation of natural resources for white people. And there are many, many different historical factors that come into why people of color don't feel safe, particularly Black and African Americans and Indigenous people as well. But POC often, even if we haven't personally had negative experiences, if our parents did or our grandparents did, there's something called transgenerational trauma, and that kind of has a ripple effect. And to be afraid. Many of us learn to be afraid without even fully knowing why. So yeah, to your point, Brad, and thank you for bringing that up, but there's so many, even if we are safe, there's also the element of making sure that we feel safe. And that incorporates a lot of different barriers and a lot of opportunities to remove those. So yeah, thank you. So another question I have here, and maybe Lieutenant Governor, we'll start with you, is what actions do you see around advancing inclusion and equity for outdoor spaces for people of color? Maybe there are goals that you've set or things that you're currently working on that might help to kind of move the needle on this a little bit.
Well, to respond to the last statement you made before the question, people's perception is their reality. And I'm thinking about that a lot in the context of this conversation, as well as, again, just in the context of how our communities and society are responding to the pandemic, in the sense that there's this implicit assumption that needs to be true, that you will feel safe when you leave your house to go do anything, whether it's to go kayaking or to go to the store. And we have to do the work to both actually make that true, and then to build the sense that that will be true, so that people can have that confidence. And so one of the things that's important when it comes to this question about, again, experiencing the outdoors and all of its fullness and beauty and opportunity, we have to change that narrative. And so I think it involves creating and investing in specific exposure opportunities, particularly for young people, to make sure that they can have those experiences. And I'm talking, this is not just Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts type stuff. I mean, these are things that the Department of Natural Resources has a number of, I think, amazing programs around youth exposure in partnership with with many organizations across the state of Michigan to create those opportunities for young people to be able to see that this is a way that you can be in the world and have fun. And that can help change that narrative and understanding that, oh, well, maybe this is okay, and can help to chip away at that sort of transgenerational trauma or stigma that may be present, subconsciously for people. We really need to deal with that, and there are programmatic steps to deal with it. I also think the point that Brad made about the industry and making sure that the industry is truly reflective of our communities in terms of its leadership and decision makers is very important. And then the last piece is we also want to make sure that we are inclusive as far as the decisions that we're making around issues and questions of environmental justice more broadly. And that is why, our administration very early on established an Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate. We have an Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where we have a pretty broad group of people represented, including young people, to make sure, and young people of color specifically, to make sure that, again, those voices are part of any conversation we have around how we are being not only good stewards of our natural and environmental resources, but also how we are opening the door to those experiences for more people across the state. And, we also I try to be as public as possible about the fact that I'm working really hard to give my kids those experiences, whether it's through state parks, through our metro park system in partnership with our counties, et cetera. I want people to see that that's something that we can do. And like with a lot of things, I think the way that you change culture is through practice. And so if we are working and doing things, it can help us move that needle.
Thank you so much. And Brad, maybe if you could, you talked a lot about sort of representation within the industry. Can you help kind of make that connection for us as to how diversity within the outdoor recreation industry can help advocate for and move towards a more inclusive outdoor space for people of color? Can you connect the dots for us a bit on that?
I can try. I'm probably the least qualified to try, but I think that's exactly it. The point for me is that I grew up in Kansas, frankly, and I grew up around the outdoors. My dad and mom took me to the national parks from the early age. I was out west playing and doing things like that, and I took it for granted that was sort of something everybody was going to enjoy. And that it really, like, the outdoors can be a transformational sort of lifestyle choice, that the mental health, the mental well-being of getting outdoors and connecting to nature. To Lieutenant Governor's point, I have 2 young kids and I'm struggling with this too. And in today's day and age, like, getting them to want to go outside for a bike ride instead of jumping on the computer is a challenge. They're 6 and 9. I wrestle with it every single day. And I can't imagine how much harder that would be for someone in Detroit or Flint or Saginaw or somewhere where the outdoors isn't, as accessible and isn't a place where they would feel welcome taking their kids, or would have to factor in. And I think that's the great sort of revelation of this moment in our time and in our history, is actually empathizing and seeing the challenges of the Black community and just being able to go outside and feel safe and not worry about getting pulled over and all those kind of things. We're all reckoning with that. And then you add, like, well, yeah, and then we've got to wrestle with the uphill battle of our kids just wanting to be indoors on screens. But the partner in this all, to me, the most exciting thing about my job, I love my job, because the industry itself is also really passionate about reckoning with this, and they want to be an ally. And the resources they could bring to bear on this as an engagement and an onboarding opportunity for a whole new generation of outdoors people, I think we want to leverage that industry to do this. And they're trying to figure out how to do it, wrestling with that same racist legacy of decision-making and myopic sort of view of it. But the power of some of our brands, whether that's Chaco and Merrill or Carhartt or Stormy Cromer, like, we have great brands in Michigan that have a great audience and great following, and they're passionate about this too. They want to bring more people on board. Whether it's people finding themselves in the outdoors for the first time because everything else is closed because of COVID, they're not going to the movie theater, so maybe they're going outside, or if it's people of color. And so I want to leverage the industry to do that. But the last point, I think, is the industry itself needs to also change the way it views the outdoors and be more open to it being viewed in a different way. We are a great sportsman state, for example, lots of hunting and fishing and camping, but that's not the only way to go outside. That's not the only outdoors that Michigan can provide. So I think we need to, and the DNR is doing this now, and I'm trying to help, like, open our eyes to see the outdoors through your eyes, through the lens of people of color. And that, frankly, Alice, that's why I loved your show from the moment I saw it, because it opened my eyes in a way that only pictures and stories can do. And I can see the outdoors now through someone else's eyes who didn't grow up the way I did, going to national parks and stuff necessarily, and where they come from. And that's what I think the industry is going to have to do, and put people in positions to make decisions who have that perspective, who see the world through that lens. And that's what I'm hoping to do, as we sort of see this as a workforce development opportunity, elevating people of color into the range of job opportunities that this industry provides.
Thank you so much. And so maybe to just expand on that a little bit more, you know, some folks might have heard the term conscious consumerism, right? Or vote with your dollar, which is, you know, kind of a way for consumers, maybe people who don't, you know, own a business, to still kind of hold the business community accountable to change, and looking at business practices and transparency. So Brad, maybe if you could just maybe speak a little bit to how folks who aren't working directly in the industry can maybe be engaged in advocating for change.
Sure, you know, and I think to me, that's one of the things about this industry that I like working with, is that, as in general terms, they're a pretty progressive group. They're trying to think about things like sustainability and diversity. So, you know, I think that's why this industry might be somewhat unique in that respect, that if you want them to be accountable, they're going to respond to that. And I think you can see that sort of the political force of the outdoor industry and some of public lands fights out west, and now in sort of water protection arguments and things like that. The industry is strong and they listen to their consumer. And so if our consumers, if you know, when you go to buy a tent or a new pair of boots or something like that, you make it clear that you're factoring in, like, you know, who is on the executive leadership team and how is this product being designed from the ground up, and that you're clear with them that that's a decision making, they're going to listen. And I think that's one of the fun things about this industry, is they are very consumer driven, and the industry is very passionate about the places and the people. It's a community, and the outdoor recreation industry really is a community that's trying to be responsive. So the more we make it clear that this is an important piece of why we're buying the products, where we're buying them, I think that they will listen to that.
Thank you. And so maybe Lieutenant Governor, if you want to, could you maybe expand a bit on, you had mentioned earlier some committees or coalitions that have been kind of assembled to create inclusion within, you know, outdoor spaces and environmental justice as a whole. And what are some ways, could you expand on some of those, and maybe if there are any ways for community members to kind of get engaged or help to inform or advocate for the work that's being done? Could you speak to those a little bit?
Yeah, the efforts, these are in our Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, whether it's from our Office of our Environmental Justice Public Advocate or our Clean Water Public Advocate. Both of them have tables where we are certainly welcoming and encouraging input and perspectives, particularly from communities that have been adversely impacted by whether it's our infrastructure or lack thereof, whether spaces have been welcoming or not. And so those can be found on our state's website related to the Environment, Great Lakes and Energy Department, EAGLE, without the A. And so folks can check that out there about how to be able to participate in those meetings and contribute to those conversations and contribute to those efforts. You know, Michigan has has a pretty rich heritage, I think, of advocacy organizations related to environmental stewardship and justice. I want to say though, and I think Brad and you, Alice, you highlighted this, that some of those institutions are institutions that need to evolve as well, in terms of sort of recognizing who should get to play the role of an environmental steward, who should be able to participate in those sorts of activities and learn those skills. And you're talking about, again, this sort of whether it's workforce training, job training, et cetera. Like, those are skills that are valuable, that are important to our economies and our ecosystem. And we want to make sure that as many people as possible in our state are equipped with those kinds of skills and experiences to be able to contribute in that way. These are the kinds of jobs like, look, these are jobs that can't be shipped overseas, right? Like, I can't outsource, taking care of our national environmental resources. And so I think it's really important, and we need to make sure those opportunities are available to people. And I'm going back to young people quite a bit, because I do think that this is a generational opportunity we have. We can deal with some of those. You talked about transgenerational trauma. If we can, pour into our younger Michiganders the primacy of these kinds of opportunities and experiences, we can perhaps change again the sort of cultural understanding about who gets to be part of this and who doesn't going forward, in a way where perhaps, my children, as they come of age, they will feel welcome and their peers will feel welcome. And then when they're dealing with their own families and their own children, it will be a relic of the past to say that to have this understanding or this implication that this was a space that was not theirs. And I think lastly, what's important too is we have to also be mindful, and I appreciate that, and Clip had a direct reference to this, the experience of our Native American and Indigenous people who live here, and just our tribal nations, and understanding their importance to the fact of being the original environmental stewards of the land that we are currently living on, and needing to always be in respectful partnership and relationship with them, and in that stewardship and in relationship that continues to learn from and grow from. That cultural understanding, I think, is really important. And that's also, I think, an opportunity when you're talking about making connections with people of color. I think there's a natural opportunity to connect and learn the history and the heritage of these lands. And that can be a way to really, I think, deepen the respect and relationship for them that can perhaps help us transcend some of these challenges that have existed before.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Sorry,
Can I
Brad,
follow on that? Yeah, just really quick. I love that. One of the things that and Alice, actually, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but your story of, where you've found Grand Rapids, but your time up at Northern Michigan as a person with mixed race backgrounds in Marquette, and the life stories, some of these things. So I've really focused in on, the idea that cultural landscapes, that there's more to these stories and these places than we have valued and interpreted through the outdoor recreation lens alone. You have a section in this pilot episode of Color Out Here where you go to Idlewild, and I just love when I found that story, and I worked with Sandra Clark at the Michigan History Center and sort of got into that, but I had the opportunity to tour several years ago Idlewild with Carolyn Finney, who wrote the book Black Spaces, White Faces, and right, vice versa, sorry. White spaces, black faces. And I think that opened my eyes in a way, because she was even talking about the naming of the streets and how people of color were able to lay claim to that landscape in the naming of the streets and things like that. I just was so amazed and sort of excited by that notion that if we elevate more voices and more perspectives into these landscapes, that we'll find stories and we'll find ownership and value that we're just not finding right now, because we're not giving space for those people to lay claim to these spaces out of their own experience, their own lived experience. And we're missing opportunities by doing that. And that's one of the things I really am excited about doing. Native American, Black, Hispanic, Arab, all these great opportunities to see the world and lay claim to the world and learn things from each other that we can do in an outdoor space in Michigan. We've got it all. I think we can do it. We really want.
Thank you so much. And I think that, you both raised a really great point about one of the tools that I think we're going to need to use to kind of unlearn what we've learned from history about who belongs outside and who doesn't. Is sort of just redefining different things. So, Brad, to your point about place, looking at place through different lenses, through, ancestral land and the history of it, looking at place in our own, personal connections to it, looking at they all intersect. And how can we kind of broaden our view or look at place through different lenses to create our own relationships to those places and not see or define a specific location as it belongs to them because this is the history that defines it. So I think that, that's one of the kind of ways we need to redefine, or I think that could be helpful. And I think another sort of redefinition is that piece of expertise and who is an expert. And Garland, I feel like, or excuse me, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, you touched on this before, but community members being able to participate and engage in some of these coalitions and some of the committees that are working to make change, even if folks don't have any experience in environmentalism or outdoor rec, professionally, or just, I think that there's a lot of kind of imposter syndrome, which, is sort of the issue of feeling like you aren't qualified to do something despite your own lived experience or passion. If you don't have, a certification in it or a degree in it, then you can't be an expert in it. And Indigenous people have been stewarding this land and effectively practicing conservation for long before this was America. And so I think that kind of redefining expertise and that a community, somebody who's in the community who's really passionate about this, but maybe doesn't have that formal background in environmentalism, still has a lot to contribute to shaping this and to shaping this change. And then I think, kind of in keeping with redefinition, and it is a great segue into one of the questions that we have is the redefinition of how we get outside. And COVID has certainly impacted that. I think some people hear outdoor recreation and assume that means, rock climbing or kayaking, but it can also be taking a walk in your neighborhood. It can be going for a bike ride. It can be laying in your favorite park. And I think that COVID has sort of, in my opinion, just what I've seen in my own neighborhood, because of the limitations on travel and having to kind of be cooped up in the house a lot, people are having to redefine their time outside. And so our first question is, do you feel that COVID-19 can somehow or has somehow created more opportunities for people of color to feel more welcome in the outdoors and in nature? And maybe Lieutenant Governor, if you want to touch on that first, and then I'll pass it over to you, Brad.
Sure. I do believe that people have been more willing to explore outdoor activities as a result of what we have needed to do to stay home and stay safe. And I think on the policy level, we've tried to do what we could to make that as safe as possible. So just to use a very concrete example, when we first included in our stay home, stay safe guidance, needing to sort of requiring face coverings, we first included that back in May. And it was really important to me to make sure that we specifically articulated within the executive action that people who wore face coverings would have full civil rights law protections. And that was important because I did have some concerns about there being basically more Black people outside with their faces covered and having that be a potential invitation for discrimination and prejudice. And so we tried to be very explicit about that from the beginning. And I see that gets connected to this conversation as like, what are the things that we can do? What are the powers that we have to make very clear that this is the type of activity that's not only encouraged, but that is protected. And so I think that we've tried to sort of have that in mind with the policy choices that we've been making. And I think that's been a space that's created by COVID. I know that I've seen some sort of commercial numbers nationally about like bike sales and like bike racks being out of stock and stuff like that. And so I think that, again, is a testament to the fact that more people are encouraging this and are participating in this. And I certainly think that's true in communities of color as well. As I've the little bit of work that I have done that's included me being in different communities across the state. I've seen a lot of kids playing outside. I've seen a lot of neighbors sitting on the porch talking to one another house to house, but talking to one another. That's healthy. That's important. And I hope that that's something, there are many things that I believe that we are going to keep with us culturally, having been the generation that, God help us, will be the ones who survive COVID-19. And one of the things I hope that we keep with us is this expanded imagination of how we spend our time, and being outside, being more of a part of that. And we're going to do what we can to make sure that there are, programmatic opportunities, that there are policy protections that can make that as safe for as broad a swath as people as possible.
Thanks so much. Brad, can you speak to that a little bit, and just the impacts of COVID and getting outdoors?
I can, although I don't think I can say it as beautifully as Lieutenant Governor just did. I love the language you used around that, and the data is there. We have lots from the industry side as well as from the Department of Natural Resources that suggest, people are finding their ways outdoors now through COVID. It's, traditional activities, hunting and fishing licenses, there's new customers coming in there, more women doing that stuff. But even sales of bicycles, that's legitimate. I'm talking to bike dealers and bike reps around the state, and they're running short of bikes. And it's also hitting, I talked to a guy from Sault Ste. Marie, Ken at Bird's Eye Outfitters, if you want to stand up paddleboard right now, you're out of luck. Like, we just can't keep up with the demand. So the numbers are there. And I think the trick really right now is that's also bringing us all outside in beautiful and wonderful ways. I love the kind of retaking of streets for outdoor dining, and more people are probably riding their bikes downtown to do stuff. I'm finding that, but that also does collide with the fact that there is all kinds of the reality of that experience. Discrimination is present in that, and the opportunities provided to people of color to go out and live and do those things, it's harder. And we have to address the fact that it is, and as painful it is that it's sometimes not as safe. I think of Devin Freeland Jr. and his interaction, and the tragedy of that there really is still rampant racism out there. And in an outdoor setting, if you're getting away and experiencing for the first time, swimming in a Michigan lake or something, and it's a bad experience, this amazing, beautiful onboarding experience for a whole new generation of outdoors could turn the other way really fast if those experiences are not safe or are unpleasant. And all the ways your video sort of touches on, it doesn't take much. It can be words, it can be physical violence, it can be a lot of things that we have to be very conscious of. So I think that's, I'll just leave with that. Like right now, one of the things I think a lot about is, if I were a person of color, I would probably want to go in a group. If I was going out beyond my comfort zone into new spaces outside where I'd want to go, I would want to bring some friends and just be, thinking about looking out for each other. And I think we, as white outdoor enthusiasts, I really hope all of us can be allies and supporters and be willing to step in if needed to sort of protect and make those spaces feel safe. And I would call on my white outdoor friends to be part of the solution to that too.
Thank you. And maybe to piggyback on that a bit, we have another question that is asking about how, if there are protective policies in place or that you know of or thinking about implementing to help kind of foster that inclusion. I feel that, Lieutenant Governor, you touched on this a little bit, with regards to face masks and discrimination. But yeah, are you aware of anything? Are you working on anything to kind of help to ensure that safety and accountability?
Well, it certainly is a consideration in every policy choice that we're making as far as emergency pandemic response. And I believe very, very deeply in the concept of muscle memory. And so I think as we have this as part of our decision-making process in terms of this response, I think this will help to inform, or I think evolve to ensure that this is part of our decision-making process as we make policies, period. And, these are the types of things that we will look to as we are reflecting and understanding about our response. Some of these things are just going to need to be how we do stuff anyway. And so I think these are the kind of things we're going to take into account. So I don't want to get like sort of too specific, but what I would say is we are looking at how we make choices broadly about programs, about policies, and to ensure that we are taking into consideration how they land on different communities. What is kind of the impact from a racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, geographic equity perspective, and that is a very important consideration as we make choices. And I think to the extent that we do that, we not only will get better policy, but we will also get policy that paves the way for more participation and inclusion from a broader range of people. And ultimately, that's the goal. I want everybody in Michigan to experience the fullness of the state. One of the things that I enjoy so much about my job is the ability to experience so many parts of the state that I did not even know about as a child. I had never been to the Upper Peninsula, like before I ran for office. And so I think that it's critical that we do everything we can to widen the pathways to those kinds of experiences, because people will be better for it. And just even on its most basic level, it's unforgettable. Like if you like the first time that you see painted rock, like you're not going to forget that, and so being able to make sure that our all of our people have access to those kind of experiences, I think is really, really important.
Thank you. Brad, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'd second that. And I think that's one of the few things, like, so I moved to Michigan not quite 20 years and so, but like I still find, you can see on the, like, I'm an outdoors guy, like I plan trips, I'm thinking about going places. And I really do believe that the more we can cross expose, like people in UP might not have been to downtown Detroit, to Belle Isle, and to some of the amazing things designed by Frederick Olmsted, like same guy that did Central Park. Like Michigan is an amazing state. And the more that we can come together, regardless of race, background, history, stories, and celebrate the different parts of this, because they are dramatically different, whether it's the Thunder Bay Shipwreck Museum over in Alpena and the shipwreck diving to downtown Detroit and sort of the slow roll, that's all legitimate outdoor recreation. That is outdoors and celebrating what it makes Michigan so great. We just have to make sure that we are really, I love that term, widening the pathway to all these places in both directions, and that we're exposing and celebrating the rich diversity and the regional characteristics and the landscapes that set this place apart. And again, like I'm competing as an economic developer, I'm competing with Salt Lake City and Zion National Park to try to bring jobs and bring companies and things like that and attention and talent to Michigan. And I don't have any doubt that we can play on that if we're absolutely really celebrating and making sure that we identify and promote the range of stuff people can do outside here. Like I'll put us up against the Rockies any day. Just go to the Lake Michigan sand dunes, or Picture Rocks, Keweenaw Peninsula, to Detroit, Grand Rapids, Bay City, you name it. We've got amazing places here.
Thank you. So the next question we have, and I'll maybe pass it over to you, Lieutenant Governor, is, as a Black man who lives this lifestyle, how do I tap in and utilize resources in order to accomplish the goals that we all want? Representation matters so much, and these approaches have to be organic.
Yeah, I appreciate this question a lot. And I think this really speaks to exposure. And, I didn't see outdoorsmen in my family in Michigan. Like, so I have family down south in Alabama and in central Alabama. And so when I would go down to visit them, sure, like they would talk about hunting and stuff like that. And that just wasn't a part of my familiar experience. And so I think as this person asking this question talks about that they do have these experiences and do live this lifestyle, I would say to start with those who you are personally connected to. That is valuable to show with young people who are in your family or in your neighborhood, et cetera, to take them with you. I remember when I moved to Farmington, we had a neighbor who had a bow and arrow. and he like introduced me to archery, which I still think is awesome, by the way. And but like he had this really fancy bow and arrow and like showed me how to use it. And all those kinds of things. And so that kind of those interpersonal exposure opportunities are not to be taken for granted. They are exceptionally valuable. And I think they can pique the curiosity of a person, especially a young person, in ways that it is not possible to predict the outcome, but it is probably going to be positive, you know, in terms of, you know, I've seen this in other areas of life, and I think it translates to outdoor experiences. So I mean, like I remember when I showed a little girl the internet for the first time, for example, showed an 8-year-old girl the internet, and like to watch the imagination explosion happen when she saw that you could see pictures of tigers that weren't at the zoo on the internet. And the same is true for people who can expose young people to what it's like to participate in the world and in the state in this way. So what I would encourage, first of all, is that, you know, you don't need to start with like a huge citywide program or whatever. While we should make investments in those, I actually think the work begins on a very interpersonal level. If there's a kid across the street who's never been on a boat, like you should take that kid on a boat. If there's a kid across the street who's never, you know, slept overnight in a park outside, like you should take that kid on a camping trip. I think that's where it starts. And then as we will do our jobs to build sort of infrastructure and sort of program level stuff, but it can start out really small. And those micro interactions, they really matter. They really do. And I am eternally grateful to my neighbor. His name was Dennis Motley, who showed me that really fancy black bow and arrow with all like the pulleys on it and stuff. And that thing was amazing. I still think it's cool even today as a grown man.
My 9-year-old son eyes with envy the compound bow that's in my neighbor's garage across the street. He's like, Dad, can we go look at that? Can we? Yeah. It's not my thing, but I love the idea, and I've leaned heavily into this idea of mentorship, and I think you're exactly right. So we've even, you know, talked internally in my office and others about this idea of, especially in this space, in the space of inclusion, that we need to focus in on that and maybe create some inclusion ambassadors and people like Alice that can be role models. And how do we make sure that that we give them opportunities to be those mentors and those folks who introduce the next generation to the outdoors? It's a really fun idea to think about. And the private sector, I think, is there. I mean, there are so many knowledgeable experts across Michigan that can teach you all that stuff, whether it's bow and arrows or kayak safety or whatever else. That's what they want to be doing as a livelihood. So if we can figure out a way to make that work, it'll be fun.
So just to risk spitballing in public, which I know is a dangerous thing, but just again from my experience and the importance of exposure opportunities. So for those who know, so I went to engineering school at the University of Michigan. I was exposed to engineering as a child through the Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program, DAPSEP. And that program was this partnership between private industry, higher education, and our school systems to expose kids to experiences and have them literally just like meet people who did engineering as their profession. And so I've got to meet people who worked at car companies and suppliers and all kinds of stuff. I would imagine that something very similar through a set of industry partnerships could be very interesting in terms of introducing these concepts and these experiences to young people in this very sort of structured way. I did these classes like during the spring, during the summer, and I think there would be sort of a natural opportunity to explore something like that that could really be transformative in terms of, again, those sort of generational exposure experiences. So, you know, there you go.
Yeah, we've been talking about the same thing, and honestly, those are not two different worlds, because I think, you know, Alice and I have talked about this, the notion of, you know, exposing people to the outdoor activities is one piece, but exposing people to the jobs in the industry is another one too. And I've talked to, you know, Michigan Design Council, for example, about doing workshops around, you know, how do you make, you know, there's programs in Michigan in Grand Rapids, like how do you make a snowboard? Like teaching kids in schools, like this is the products that I think the more people we can get exposed to the range of opportunities in design and engineering and frankly, like filmmaking and everything Alice is doing, like this is all stuff that we need more people, more viewpoints, more diverse expertise playing in all these fields with an outdoor lens. And I think it will filter through all the way across the board. I love spitballing in public.
And that actually is a great segue into our next question, which is how much exposure to nature is built into secondary education curriculum, and can we do more with our education systems to foster this inclusion? I will, go for it, Lieutenant Governor.
I'm going to defer to Brad on this one pretty heavily. What I will say, just because I happen to be aware of it because my wife works for the Detroit Public Schools Community District. I know that Detroit Public Schools, for example, owns a summer camp called Camp Birch Early that is out, I believe, in Gregory, Michigan. And so one of the things that they've been working to build into the curriculum is this sort of overnight outdoor educational experience for the students, and they're sort of working that into the curriculum. And I think that's really exciting. And so I don't know what that looks like in other districts, but I do know that asset does exist for Detroit Public School students. And I think that's an important example to a point that Brad made earlier about the fact that there's a very different level of access to outdoor experiences for a number of young people in Detroit. And so the fact that the district has that asset, I think, is a really important resource.
Yeah, and I'm still learning about the range of opportunities and camps and things like that around, and how do we all knit this together and with outfitters and guides and all that stuff into that stuff. But there's a lot in Michigan. I will say that there's a lot of infrastructure. I am, trying to keep track. And then one thing I am very concerned about, and with a reference to secondary education exposure, is that COVID has, I'm reading about, really negative impact on a lot of our outdoor education, environmental education programs, not just in Michigan, but nationally, just because, like everything else, these were small operations often operating sort of on the fringe but they were providing a service. And so right now they're really hurting. Kids haven't been able to go to them, so they're budgetary. So, those are great opportunities. I think it's a complex system to bring public schools together with sort of the private outdoor education. And there's great reset assets in Michigan, the outdoor Association of Outdoor Education and Outdoor Recreation and Education, Jeanette Stosky in Ann Arbor. We have national expertise in Michigan that we can draw from and how to link those together. But I think it's a great plan to continue to work forward on.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for just one more, and that is, it's some of this work that introduced me to the Michigan outdoors. However, I live in another state. What are your lessons or recommendations for fostering inclusivity in other states and localities?
Move to Michigan, especially if you have a business. You should move it here to Michigan. I'm an economic developer. So
There you go.
Yeah, what Brad said, you should do that. We have more lakes than everybody. So, no, I think that, I interact quite regularly with my counterparts in other states. And this is something that is on a lot of people's minds, is how can, because states have different sets of assets, right? And so wanting to make sure that everyone can take advantage of those, I think is something that a lot of my counterparts are thinking about. And just what I would say is any call to action around expanding who is able to access these resources and activities and experiences is always and will always be a timely call to action. So I think what you could do in another state is to continue to encourage those who are in decision-making positions to make choices that expand opportunity, to say, we know historically who has participated in this program. How can we make that more expansive, more inclusive? How can we reduce barriers to participation for certain populations? Can there be a partner who can sponsor to provide, scholarships or financial supports for people who may not have otherwise been able to afford this experience to be able to afford it? Is there a way that we can provide transportation to get that? So thinking about, I think the types of questions that you ask those in decision-making powers around how can they expand access, I think that's the best way to advocate. And I believe that you'll find inclined ears in other states if the experiences and the conversations I have with my counterparts are any accurate indication.
And I'll just be really brief, sorry, sort of offhand, but in truth, these new offices, and I credit Michigan with being a leader in creating this Office of Outdoor Industry. There's, I want to say about 15 states at this point, but we were on the front edge of this. And there are so many great people working in whatever your state's is, Department of Natural Resources or whatever, but these new offices, I think, are critical. So if you don't have one, you could start advocating for one because it can cross bridges. So I get to work with Department of Health and Human Services on translating trail signage into other languages. And I get to work with DNR on their projects as well as economic development. So these new roles really are doing, I think, a lot of the critical work of bringing people who are overworked and busy and running parks and doing great stuff a little bit higher strategic conversation. So in your state, you should ask for one. Join the club with the cool kids.
And I think that's kind of a great way to kind of tie all this together. Certainly something that I've seen through COVID is the necessity for interdependence between businesses, between different sectors, whether it be the business community and nonprofits or government institutions. That collaboration is really key in creating holistic impact. And even the Recreate Responsibly guidelines is, as I said before, a coalition of over 650 different nonprofits and businesses working collaboratively to help inform this change. So check out that website and see if there's ways that you can kind of get some leadership in your state or your locality to kind of plug in. And with that, we're at time, and I just want to thank everybody who submitted questions and joined us today. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor and Brad, just for sharing your thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts you wanted to share before we log off here?
Well, I'll give Lieutenant Governor the last word. So I'll just say, anybody who hasn't gone online and watched Alice's show, Shaping Narratives Color Out Here, it really is amazing. And I'm really excited about trying to find resources to film a whole season of that, because I think it could be a really valuable resource across the country too. So thank you for having me. I've been really honored to be part of the discussion, and thanks, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Brad, for your service. Thank you, Alice, for this platform. Again, thank the WGVU, thank the Kellogg Foundation for helping to make this particular conversation and this broader conversation possible. I'll just say that in this moment, in our collective history, we're facing some really important questions. And one of the deepest questions that we're facing is, what are we going to do as individuals, as communities, as a society to deal with the fact that our history is covered with examples of where we chose to leave people out and where we chose to actively exclude people. And therefore, our responsibility is to take every opportunity to make a choice to say that people are welcomed, that people are valued, and you are welcomed and valued, not regardless of, not in spite of, but because of the different identities and perspectives and experiences that you bring to the table. And so this conversation around what that means for our outdoors is an important part of that conversation. And it's just one additional realm that we need to think about this holistically and intentionally, just like we need to think about it in terms of public safety, just like we need to think about it in terms of economic opportunity, just like we think about it in terms of educational access. This is something that is also important because it is yet another way that people experience public and civic life. So that's why this matters to me. That's why I'm proud to be part of this conversation, and hopefully to be part of the solution that leads to a more inclusive experience for people in this realm. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of that. I think this is an important part of my public service. So everybody be safe.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much. Again, Lieutenant Governor and Brad, really appreciate you. And yeah, thanks for joining. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, we are no longer live. Oh, I'll have to call Alice. Lieutenant Governor, you are excellent. Thank you so much.
Y'all, my pleasure. Y'all take care.
You too. I can't hear you. You're muted, Mariana.
No. How did you think that went?
I think it went well. I